5 here on Boulder County Community Radio. We're KGNU Boulder at 88.5 FM, 99.9 Fort Collins, and 93.7 for some of you receiving us up in the mountains. Cloudy skies tonight with a good chance of thunderstorms. Prepare for some rain. Coming up at 6 o'clock, world news from the BBC. At 7, the latest in hip-hop music from Eclipse. It's 5:30 now at KGNU Boulder. Antithesis is next.
Good afternoon and welcome to Antithesis.
Antithesis is a weekly radio soiree of stimulating commentary and entertaining conversation discussing issues of importance in our daily lives.
Antithesis airs Sunday afternoon at 5:30.
I'm Richard Curtis.
I'm Leo Griep-Ruiz.
The opinions expressed on Antithesis are the opinions of the person speaking them,
and do not necessarily represent the views of the board, staff, or management of KGNU or of us here at Antithesis.
because I might not agree with him.
And I might not agree with him.
"27 years after the deaths at Kent State, the chief of police in Boulder, Colorado, was preparing to spill blood, to kill students to stem the tide of minor riots just outside the University of Colorado. Quote, "And we knew, if the riots continued, that we had to engage the students, and that a lot of police officers and a lot of students would be hurt, and probably some people would be dead," Chief Tom Colby said in a public meeting May 6th. The mayor of Boulder telephoned the governor of Colorado to advise him that she might be calling in National Guard troops if the riot went on for another day. After the second day, tens of thousands of dollars in tear gas had been used by hundreds of cops in riot gear firing rubber bullets. Community reaction has been varied, but some have said that the police response was appropriate. After all, 1,500 students were burning furniture, throwing rocks and bottles, breaking windows. Order must be maintained, but at what cost? In fact, the rocks did not begin to fly until the police arrived, responding to reports of a bonfire and a fight. Some people have said that the students were irresponsible for rioting in the first place in the face of ordinary police response to the bonfire incident. This is true on the surface, but there's more going on here. Students setting a disused sofa onto a fire is an annual occurrence in Boulder. Students gathering in a large crowd late on a spring night towards the end of classes and getting rowdy is also an annual occurrence in Boulder. Why were there riots this year? According to one observer quoted in a local paper, the root of the riots was the ongoing violation of civil rights that so many of the students have endured. Some have said that demanding the right to drink underage, to drink in public, and what have you, do not constitute valid civil rights claims. This sentiment may be true, but it is irrelevant. What is at issue is the motivations of a crowd and the question of how the authorities then deal with that crowd. Killing students, as Chief Colby suggests, is not an answer to antisocial behavior. The breaking of a few windows, the removal of some parking meters, and a confrontation with police are not grounds for state-sanctioned murder. For these events to coincide with the state-sanctioned murder in Ohio 27 years ago should give us all pause. What are we doing? Where are we going? The claim that the value system of the students is at fault for the riots has become the chorus of those supporting the police. But the students are not on the city payroll, so if anyone can be held responsible for preventing a recurrence, it must be the city authorities. Democracy relies on the consent of the governed, just as community policing relies on the consent and involvement of the policed. In this case, the students feel, rightly or wrongly, alienated and to some extent abused by the system, by the police. What is at issue is whether the police are to encourage or discourage the students' feelings of alienation. The other claim put forth by what has become the fascist mainstream is that order must be maintained. These people claim that the students burning things in the streets, throwing rocks or bottles and tearing up parking meters, are all acts of destruction, the destruction of other people's property. So what? What kind of demented value system would hold that it's better to kill people than to tolerate the destruction of a few $1,000s worth of things? These same people, presumably, hold themselves forth as models of the kind of moral behavior the students should aspire to. State-sanctioned murder to quell what is in the end insignificant property damage. These would-be murderers are the model of moral behavior? Beyond the quality of the students' immediate interactions with police, we ought to keep in mind that Boulder is a town in which murderers go free, so long as they have enough money. And Colorado is a state where corporate criminals go unpunished, so long as they are large enough. And we live in a nation where one branch of the government uses the profits from smuggling cocaine and heroin to pay for murder and torture all over the Third World, while other branches have locked up hundreds of thousands of non-violent so-called drug offenders. Is it any wonder the students have no respect for the police, or for that which the police are actually protecting? And what next for Colorado? Went out a little quick on that one, but...
Well, you cut yourself off there rather sharply.
Oh, I cut Neil Young off.
Corporate criminals, huh?
He was being a little long-winded.
We got an expert in corporate criminals in the studio with us here. I'd like to introduce Carolyn Johnson.
Welcome, Carolyn.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to make it clear that I'm not here as a corporate criminal.
No, but you work, you're the, Western Regional Representative of the Citizens Coal Council, is that right?
Well, I'm with the Western office of it, yes.
And because you do this work with the Citizens Coal Council, then you're an expert on corporate criminals.
Absolutely, yes.
Tell us about the kind of corporate criminals that you deal with.
Well, we deal with, we see the large coal companies that are running roughshod over most of the people in the coal fields. We have Peabody Coal. We have, you like names, I presume.
Oh, yeah, names.
Yeah. We have Peabody Coal, BHP Minerals, Cypress Amax, Consolidation Coal. It goes down the list. Rape and ruin. Take the coal, burn it, and that's what powers us right here in the studio.
Well, gee,
Ooh.
Richard, here we are, able to be on the air because of corporate criminality and wholesale criminality, and we're discussing retail criminality on the part of 1,500 students burning a sofa.
Well, I think they tore up 30 or 40 parking meters, too. But they probably got a lot of support for that.
You know, I was talking with Pam White, the managing editor of the Colorado Daily, who told me that one of the chants that students were using as they stood around some sort of burning object, I don't know if it was a sofa, or maybe they were just roasting couch potatoes. You know, anyhow, there was some sort of blaze going on, some sort of conflagration with a group of these students standing around, and they were chanting, "We're rich, and we're not going to take it anymore. We're rich, and we're not going to take it anymore." You know, when I saw, about 3 or 4 years ago, I saw that LSD use was up among youth, and I commented at that time to my wife that it seemed to me that there was going to be more and more in the way of disturbances among youth, because the only reason I could see them going for something like LSD is because they were dissatisfied with what current, reality had to offer them, and so they were looking for another reality. And to me, that was an indication of the degree of alienation and of an incipient rebellion against what's going on now. And this, what you've said, this is one of those times when, gee, listeners, I'm sorry, I think I agree with Richard this time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know, I mean, alienation is worse. The generation gap is worse. I've written about this, that the way I see things now, the generation gap is worse than it was when I was in my 20s 30 years ago. That at least at that time, there was an arena of discussion. People of my age, late teens, early 20s, in those days, we disagreed with basically everything that, the so-called mainstream culture had to offer us. And they disagreed, our elders at that time within that society disagreed with basically everything we were doing, growing our hair long, protesting the war. In the days before there was AIDS, there was other kinds of stuff that was, going around. Excuse me, not just what we did, but what we got, if you catch my drift. And, sexual promiscuity was not a potentially lethal activity in those days, which made things very different from what our youth have to deal with now. And if nothing else, romantic abandon would be kind of a safety valve. And I think that our youth now are dealing not only with a lack of areas in which to let off steam, but also that they don't even get the respect that we got 30 years ago, which was to have people look at us and say, we don't like what you're doing, we disagree with what you're doing now. I think that there's this whole generation of people that came through the Vietnam War protests who get to go around and act like, oh, well, in the 60s and the 70s, we were so bad, man. We protested against the war. We protested for the farm workers. We boycotted grapes, and there was all of this stuff. And we were so bad. And the youth that I run with, and I run with a lot of youth, have an attitude that, well, if you were so bad 20, 30 years ago, how come things are worse now? And I just think there's going to be more of this stuff.
Well, one of the things that struck me about the fairs in Boulder and what you were reading, Richard, was that, and partly in what you were saying about the big important things that we protested 25, 30 years ago, the war in particular, and boycotting grapes and all of the big social change stuff, but it really started on the steps of, I've forgotten the name of the hall, Sproul Hall or something like that at Berkeley University of California at Berkeley, with the free speech movement. And I can't remember what the word was that he wasn't supposed to use. It was something like damn.
No, it wasn't. It was an acronym. In fact, I know that...
Do you remember
people,
that?
Yes, people...
But it was a very minor... The point of it is that it was a very minor, in retrospect, a very minor thing that keyed off a lot of stuff. And here in Boulder, it was beer, and access to beer and being able to drink it. Now, that doesn't mean that Boulder is going to lead to bigger and better, more, shall we say, socially significant, important things than drinking your beer. But that is how... getting access to the beer, but that is often an expression of something that is welling up, that is much more when they are focused on items like that. And of our day, on our age, if we're proud of that, it really started on something very minor.
Well, it had to do with freedom of speech. It was
a free speech.
It began around being able to disseminate political information, and people being forbidden from doing that kind of thing on the campus there. And then the chancellor of the university, Clark Kerr, his first name began with C, his last name began with a K. And so this then led to people forming an organization, or at least having a slogan, which was freedom under Clark Kerr. And, of course, that was reduced to its obvious acronym, which I can't say on daytime radio.
I'd forgotten that.
I don't think you can say it on nighttime radio anymore either.
But anyhow, you can think about it. Like I say, Clark, C-L-A-R-K, Kerr, K-E-R-R, his initials
We're
are
with
C
you. We're with
and
you.
K.
Yes.
I just want to rub it in. Freedom under Clark Kerr.
At any rate.
And respect, though, was what it was about. Right?
Yes.
Respect.
Oh, yeah.
It was turned into a joke with that particular slogan, but it was about respect. And from what I've heard of what was going on in Boulder, underlying the ridiculousness of the right to defend underage drinking or rioting for the right to drink underage, really I think gets to a deeper issue, which is one of respect.
Oh, sure. But they start with very seemingly almost absurd little outward things. I mean, we wouldn't
spark.
Think, the spark.
The thing that really struck me, because I've talked with a number of people about this particular commentary, and I also happen to be in a position where I know a number of people from the Boulder Police Department as well as other local police departments who all are, they're all reasonable, decent, caring people. And yet this obscenity seemed to happen. in this confrontation.
You're talking about Kobe's statement, the police chief's statements. Yeah.
The whole thing seemed to me sort of obscene. I mean, why was it necessary for cops in riot gear to shoot rubber bullets at students?
Well, you know, everybody's a nice guy until you cross them. I mean, that's an issue that
That what?
Man, there's a lot of times when I'm involved in discussions about some personality or another in terms of some political dynamic that's going on, and this individual will frequently be defended by somebody by saying, but so-and-so's a nice guy. Everybody is a nice guy until you cross them. You know, everybody is, you know, more or less. I mean, there's some like flat-out jerks, you know, but, you know, there's the famous home footage, right? Those well, I don't know if they're really home footage, but there's the famous footage of Adolf Hitler at a picnic, you know, playing with a little kid on his knee and stuff. You know, I mean, everybody's a nice guy until you cross them, and some people have much lower thresholds than others for turning into violent aggressors.
Well, the nice guy test is really a non-test, is what you're saying.
Yeah, nice guy don't matter. Reasonable, caring, all of that. It doesn't matter because everybody at some point has got that.
Well, I think the bigger point, though, is what should we do? What should those of us in radical radio do in order to interact with the police on issues like this? Because you don't want to simply support the absurdity of the right to drink underage. So there's something else going on, but we have to, one must acknowledge, it seems from my interactions with people who were all in favor of what the police did, that you have to at least acknowledge that those people have some point. You know, that people running rampant, throwing rocks at other people and burning things in the street, that, you know, there's something about that that's inherently dangerous and needs to be limited. But obviously the way they went about limiting it only made it worse. So, that was clearly the wrong approach.
Well, was the rioting a symptom of something, or was it the cause of something? You know, and we see this lack of historic memory all the time dealing with politicians or on any kind of issue anybody wants to bring up, whether it's coal mining or military intervention in some other part of the world, or what amounts to domestic military intervention and activities within the current borders of the United States. There's always this inability to look at long-term processes. And the first thing I would say in terms of dealing with the police themselves is that we should demand that the police set an example. Who is the ultimate authority figure in this society, if not the cops? Who should set an example for our youth on how to behave, if not the cops? Why is it that if a person in authority sexually abuses a child, the charges brought against that person and the potential penalty that that person must pay if found guilty for using color of authority to sexually abuse a child are greater than the charges and the penalties levied against someone who is like merely a neighbor? Should it not then follow that police who abuse other people's civil and human and social and cultural rights under color of authority should be brought under greater charges?
Follows to me.
You know, yet what we see happen, there's a case in Denver of a cop who held a gun to a woman's head, a woman who was in jail, and he got fired. Now, there's videotape of this stuff, right? Surveillance tapes inside the jail facility. He got fired. Now, if I held a gun to somebody's head at the bus stop, for whatever reasons, you know, assuming that this is not somebody engaged in violence, I can use the affirmative defense of self-defense and all those kinds of things. If I just, you know, held a gun to somebody's head because I wanted them to do something, give me a ride, take me to the theater or something, I'm going to be brought up on certain pretty serious charges. And I'm not operating under color of authority. You know, to me that seems like the very beginning. And then there's another issue, which is that this is basically an alcohol-based society. You know, there are two major drugs, well, three drugs really, that are common to current, well, to the what I call the dominating culture, and they are, you know, nicotine, caffeine, and alcohol. Now, nicotine is more and more on its way out because of the health effects, not just of the nicotine, but of the tars and all the other stuff that's in the cigarettes, the carcinogenic, qualities of that stuff. But then, and I will add that I am a fairly regular cigar smoker, and I smoke cigarettes socially and stuff like that. But I also make a point of, dealing with who I'm dealing with. If they don't want me to do it around them, I don't get into all that. But we got caffeine, we got alcohol. Caffeine is seen as being more or less benign, and then we have alcohol. Alcohol is responsible for more deaths in this country than I think that consumption of alcohol is responsible for more deaths than any other behavior.
I think you're right.
With,
Well, but there's a bigger point, though, about how are we to proceed? Because obviously, Leo, if your analysis is correct, these situations are going to get worse. And
the alienation is getting worse.
Exactly.
The repression within this country is getting worse, and the youth are fed up with it. And they're especially fed up with a bunch of old farts with long hair that sit around smoking dope the way that my parents' generation sat around drinking beer and bragging about how bad they were. We fought in World War II. Well, okay, that was something real, fighting against fascism, though there are certain arguments that can be made at certain levels about World War II. Still, here we got a whole generation of young people, and I was running with young people in the early 80s, that first wave of punks, because of the organizing that I was doing with the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. 10 years ago I was 40. And at that time I was running with people who were 20, who were telling me about what it was dealing with their parents, who were of my age, who were just not involved, not engaged with their reality. So the first thing I can think of is that adults have got to become older people have got to be adults and set an example for appropriate behavior that is relevant to our youth. And if they don't do it, well, good luck.
Well, I understand.
I think you left out a drug.
Okay.
Money.
Oh, yeah.
And I see a lot of the cultural values that we have in this country now attached to the money. And the making of the more money and what you spend it on and what you do with it, it's more than consumerism to a high degree, and that sends a hell of a message to young people. You are worth what you do, or what is spent on you, or what you can produce yourself and go spend. And it has really, I think, changed. I think it's always been an undercurrent, a pretty strong outward current, but I think it's become more. I think it's addictive in ways that may not be physically, such as nicotine and caffeine to an extent, but that by discounting or not looking at that, then we're not seeing a lot of what has happened, right, and is happening with that issue.
Well, and that would be a big part of the alienation, too, that if students, facing graduation don't have much in the way of opportunities to make money, or to survive in society, then they're going to feel all that more alienated.
Well, I was reading the paper, I think, yesterday, and they had a graduation ceremony at the Colorado School of Mines, and something like 70% of them already had jobs lined up, and they were going in at an average of $40,000.
Right, but
they weren't rioting it.
No, but it's also true that in the 1980s...
Are you saying that that the lack of money produces
Well, the lack of
beer,
opportunity produces more alienation.
I don't know that there is a lack of opportunity.
Well, Colorado School of Mines is a little different, from what they get out of that particular college and what the industry that they go into and the mindset that they have, which would generally tend to focus them toward energy resource exploitation, is very different from going to CU Boulder and having a liberal arts degree.
Well, I am not contesting that, but what I'm wondering whether there is that much lack of opportunity, or if it's lack of satisfying opportunities, which is something quite different.
That's even, I think, even more extreme. But,
yeah.
But when I did my freshman year at the School of Mines in the early '80s, and at that time, virtually 100% of graduates had job offers.
Yeah.
Offers, plural.
Right.
Before they graduate. So if that's 75%, that's 25% reduction.
They said it was up from previous years.
Well, it had really dropped off in the late 80s.
The point of that is there isn't a lot of sympathy with people who go through a state university and get a very nice education, a fairly expensive education, and then complaining about lack of opportunity.
Well,
we have to really define what that lack of opportunity is.
Well, we don't have a lot of sympathy for that in our culture generally, for you know, anybody who has a lack of opportunity.
Is what we're talking about the objective circumstances of the opportunity to get a job within that's largely, well, historically at least irrelevant. You know, a lot of these jobs that are available are jobs working for corporations that make, you know, I don't know what kind of gadgetry that is not really important in terms of the needs of people's lives. You know, we're dealing with a society that's producing all kinds of ridiculous stuff and largely putting people into the defense industries, which are also shrinking, when there is a need for medical infrastructure. There's a need for educational infrastructure. You know, there's a need for the needs that exist are not really being met if we look at what the needs of society are.
Exactly.
And I think that a lot of what we're looking at is also something beyond the objective circumstances of can they get a job which will pay them well to do something that they hate for 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week, or is there something deeper which has to do with a sense of relevance in what they do in their lives and with a sense of being respected. Maybe these youth at some deep and perhaps even unconscious level are looking at a future which will have them become the people that they despise. Could that be part of it?
Well, I'm sure it's a small part of it at least, but I think that surviving comes first. So if one doesn't have the prospect of a job at all, the issue of whether the job is meaningful is secondary. And certainly there are a lot of people out there, college graduates, who have no prospects of reasonable employment. You know, they can get a job as a waiter or something.
What's wrong with that?
And of course, Boulder, we have the highest percentage of PhDs on our wait staff as any city in the country.
Well, what's wrong with that?
What does that do?
No. Perfectly respectable job.
Yeah,
Well,
let me say,
but it's hard to
Let
survive.
me ask you, Richard. Okay, well.
Not a very good
Come
living.
on, what's wrong with that? Everybody has to start somewhere. I'll do that. I'll do the devil's advocate part. What's wrong with that? Now, these are young people out there getting the jobs, and everybody's got to start somewhere. You know, when I was a kid, I had to walk 18 miles to school barefoot through the snow, and then I got a job as a waiter, and now look at me. I'm the head of,
Well, all right. But that's not where I
wasn't
that's
that
not
Armand Hammer's life story?
I think so. But that's not where I want to go in our last couple of minutes. I think we should very quickly at least address the question of what to do. If people, the youth especially, are becoming more alienated and therefore more hostile towards the authorities, and the authorities are deciding that what they need to do is to take a firm hand at that issue instead of any other possible approach they could take, we're looking at escalating violence in society.
Well,
Is there a way to deal with that?
Set an
or do we
example.
just sit back and watch?
I think on one hand, it's up for every person to set an example of the kind of behavior. You know, it's one of them do unto others as you would have them do unto you kind of deals on the one hand, and then I think also demand real accountability on the part of the authority figures.
Which we could do as taxpayers.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of different ways to demand accountability. Oh, and we got to demand accountability of us here at Antithesis.
Accountability.
That's why, we got
Oh,
a
that's
couple.
right.
We got just got a couple of minutes left.
We
I
have
want
to be
ask
accountable?
the listeners. Yeah, listeners. Yeah, out there, you're listening. If you think that these discussions are worth anything, tell you what, please let KGNU know. We're on a 13-week sort of trial program here. This is sort of a 13-week pilot for this show, Antithesis. And tell you what, we will promise to have other people in here besides just Richard and me.
Well, we do.
We do. Right now, we got Carolyn in here.
I'm another person.
No, but there will be more of an ongoing, like, ever-changing roster of other people coming in here trying to keep Richard and me from just turning us into this, two-guy gab fest.
Two-guy gab fest.
Yeah, so please contact the station and let them know what you think. Oh, there's the music. What do you think, Richard? You're telling people that they should have some kind of answers to this. What do you think?
I think it's going to get worse.
Yeah, me too. What about you, Carolyn?
I wish